So are you seeing a theme today so far? Wherever we are, God is. Two questions. How often do you think yourself outside of God? How often do you think God outside of yourself? Two really very powerful questions. How am I thinking myself outside of God? Am I thinking of God as totally outside of me? Well, today we're beginning a series that will take us through the end of the end of March, leading up to Easter, that is based on the foundation of unity. I find that it's very helpful, at least once every 9 months or so, to go back to the basics, because the basics aren't simple. The basics are the essentials. It's the basics upon which everything else is built. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at what we call unity's spiritual principles. There are 5 spiritual principles that if you go to a lot of different unity churches, you'll find that every unity church is autonomous. They're very different in many ways. And you'll find these 5 spiritual principles in any unity where you go. But to me, it's really important to also say that these are not unity's principles, that a principle or a spiritual law is something that can apply to anybody. Anybody can apply it to their life. It's just like saying that 2 + 2 = 4, or how the law of gravity works. Those are no one's laws, and yet those laws can work for everyone. And so when we talk about these 5 principles, unity has distilled them to be able to point to them as things that we can say, yes, this is a philosophy, an idea that we work with, but they're certainly found in many different ancient traditions. Every Sunday, we talk about one of the principles, and I'll come back to that in just a minute, but a little bit more just about unity. One of the things I like about unity is unity doesn't tell us what to believe. Amen, anybody? Doesn't tell us what to believe, but says, rather consider your beliefs and the power of your own beliefs. So it's always pointing us back to, what do you believe? And as Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you or not? If you go to the major unity website, it says, unity does not require its members to espouse to any one particular belief or creed. We believe instead that each individual is on a journey for truth within his or her own soul. Would you give me the first slide? Eric Butterworth, who is a unity minister and writer, said, we are dealing with a technique for the application of fundamental spiritual laws, discovered and demonstrated by Jesus and many other great mystic teachers. The thread of truth. The fundamental concepts that enable any individual practically and creatively to release his or her own imprisoned splendor. I love that word. He's pulling that from, I believe Walt Whitman used that term, but unity talks about our indwelling Christ. In Hinduism, they refer to it as the Atman. Buddha may say your Buddha self, the divine spark. And so throughout the next few weeks, we'll break down some of these things and what do they mean. But the word practical spirituality, Unity today uses a tagline that says a positive path for practical spirituality, because the goal is to make it practical in your life. And so in a nutshell, the 5 that we're going to talk about, the way I remember them is this: God is, I am, think it, pray it, live it. Okay, would you get your fist out and let's say this with me? God is, I am, think it, pray it, live it. Now you just, in a nutshell, that's the unity, those 5 ideas that we embrace. God is all that is, the nature of God. I am, we are created in the likeness and image of God. All that we are is made of God. What else could we be? The third one, the power of our thoughts, that our thoughts have creative power. Our mind is the part of us that is both local and not local. Has anybody drifted out of this room since you've been here? Has anybody drifted out of this room since I started talking? Come back. And so our thoughts have the capacity to shape our experience of reality. Prayer. We believe that prayer and meditation is what attunes us to the truth of our being. It's already there. Prayer is about attuning us. And then the fifth one is I live it, taking action. The only way to make something practical is to put it into practice into your own life. And so today we begin with the first two. Now the first two, God is, I am, are sort of the theory. The other three, think, pray, live, are action. As with anything, you need the theory and how do you act on the theory in order to make it an experience. In order for it to be useful, you must have the conception, and then how to express the conception. And so 1 and 2, the more I work with this, it becomes really difficult for me to separate the first two, that we say every Sunday there is one presence and one power active in the universe and in my life, God. That's what the first one is. And then the second one is talks about our nature. Those two really are a foundation. Whatever we believe about the nature of God is what we believe about life. And then ourself. If you think about it, any challenge in your life, any opportunity, there's two things that you're always standing on, and that is, what do I believe about life? Another way to say that is, what do I believe about God? Einstein said you can believe that everything is a miracle or nothing is a miracle. So the first one has to do with what do we believe about God, our Creator? And then hand in hand with that, what do we believe about ourselves? That is the foundation of every human life. And a foundation is the most important thing. Any of you, if you just think about it, if something happens to the foundation of this building, the whole building is going to feel the effects. If we want to expand and build a greater building, one of the first things we're going to have to do is expand the foundation. Several years ago, I learned an interesting lesson about foundation. This is when I had just moved to Kansas City attending ministerial school, and I came back home to Goldsboro, North Carolina for Christmas. And at that time, my nephew was about 10, and then I had a younger niece and a little nephew. They were all three there. So when I arrived, I brought in one of those gingerbread houses. I wanted to spend some time with them, and we were going to make a gingerbread house. So my mom and my sister, their mom left, my brother left, and left me with the kids so they could go do some shopping, and here we're making this gingerbread house. So as we're unpacking it and they're opening all the things, my youngest niece and nephew said, can we eat some of this? And I said, you can eat one thing each. Now my older nephew, who was now 10 or 11, he's standing off to the side because of course he's too cool at this point to make gingerbread houses. And as soon as I said, yeah, you can eat one thing, he said, that's not a good idea, Aunt Darlene. And I said, no, it's okay, it's okay. So I turned around and I did something, and I looked back, and my youngest nephew was eating nothing other than the foundation. Why not? It's this big giant thing. If you get to eat one and you're just 5, 6 years old, eat the foundation. He did the whole thing. So I said, no problem. Well, there's stuff in the pantry, we'll start. And my nephew, standing up, is just shaking his head. So we attempted initially to put something together. Well, you have to have a foundation. So I thought, no problem. I look in my mom's cupboard. I find graham crackers. They look good. They look similar to the giant thing he ate. And so I line up some graham crackers. And then we start with the icing, which is the glue. Well, you know what happened. They slid apart. It just... what we created looked like a cave. There was nothing gingerbread house looking about it. My mom and sister got home and they said, what did you create? My nephew said at the end, he watched the whole thing and he said, Aunt Darlene, pretending you have a foundation is never a substitute for having a foundation. He graduated from UNC Chapel Hill last year and he works in real estate. He's always loved land development. He's always been a person that does that. And so I really, that point came home. How many times in our life do we try to make things work? And we're putting in more glue. We're trying to put on more pretty things and shiny things. And we're trying to go faster or whatever it is we're doing. But the truth of the matter is, there's a problem in the foundation. So the foundation is always am I thinking myself outside of God? Am I thinking God outside of myself? The first principle is the principle of one. That there is one power, one presence, one God, one, out of which all of life expresses itself. And we are made of this one. As I said earlier, what else could we be made of? All is one. If you begin to think about that, I want to show you the first scripture first. From Ephesians. Make every effort to keep yourself united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. For there is one body and one Spirit, just as you have been called to one glorious hope for the future. There is one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, in all, and living through all. To me, it doesn't get any more clear than that. There is one. But just as soon as we say that, I remember the first time I went to a Unity church in Raleigh, North Carolina. I grew up Pentecostal, and when I reached a point in my life and that did no longer support my belief system, I left it all. I left it all, and the universe became my teacher, and I began to, over a period of years, come to some of my own ideas. And the first time I went into that church in Raleigh, North Carolina, and they said there is only one presence and one power, I was actually a little bit nervous to say it. Because how many of you grew up believing there was another power? Satan or the devil. Remember Flip Wilson's famous line? The devil made me do it. I really believed that this other power was so strong that if I said there's only one power, one presence, that it might get me. Something might get me. So for me, it took me a while. I went, and I'm the kind of person, I am not going to say something if I don't believe it. But when I said it, I resonated with it. And so what it did, it began to lead me back to my own foundation. What did I believe? And was it working for me? And so a lot of times in unity, when we say there's only one presence and one power, what a lot of people are thinking is, but what about evil? A number of years ago, when Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founders of Unity, they had a radio program, and they, along with Ernest Holmes, who was the founder of religious science and the founder of Christian Science, and different things that came up in this era that we call New Thought, Ancient Wisdom, began to speak on the radio about this. People said, well, if there's one power, then what about evil? This comes from one of his radio transcripts in 1895. Charles Fillmore said, "You mistake what we are saying if you think we deny seeming evil. What you do deny is that evil has principle back of it. It does not come from God. Man creates it. Hence, it is not permanent and has not power except what we give it." Another writer said, "The source of what we call good and evil is free will. You are an agent of free will, and your attitude and actions can be used for purposes of good or evil, used to hurt or heal." I like to describe it like this. Imagine that you had two rooms side by side, adjoined by one of those pocket doors. One room is totally illuminated and filled with light. This room is totally pitch dark, no light at all. One door in between. The moment you pull back the door, what happens? The light spills over. The opposite does not happen. The darkness does not spill over. You see, it is not a separate thing in and of itself. It is the absence of light. And so is there evil in the world? You bet there is. There are acts of evil. And I do believe that it's sort of like a person who's under the influence of alcohol or under the influence of drugs. We've all seen people that weren't even themselves anymore. It's as if they were under the spirit of something else. You see, we're all running, we're all under the influence of something at all times. The question is, what is the quality of the spirit that we are choosing to animate? We all have the capacity to animate and to show up, just like electricity can be used for purposes to illuminate this building or purposes to destroy the building. That so it is with the one power and the one presence. It can be used for purposes of good or purposes of what we may call evil. But to realize that there is one leads us into this powerful place of oneness. That's why the scriptures say, if God be for me, nothing can be against me, because there is only the one power. And so it's learning to realize that within our own mind, within our own being, how are we at war within our own self? That's what we're going to break down over the next 4 weeks. So when we look at there is only one, the second thing we do then is we begin to ask, well then, where is God? How do we access God? Would you show me the next slide? Pretty much every major religion, I have found the recipe for being happy. Whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty, whatever I have, wherever I am, I can make it through anything in the awareness of the one who makes me who I am. How many of you would like a recipe for happiness? The recipe for happiness, it says, this is the New Message translation of Philippians 4, is the awareness of the one who makes me who I am. Remember, the foundation has to do with our relationship with what do we believe about the one, what do we believe about God, what do we believe about how life works, and who I am, what do we believe about ourselves. Would you go to the next slide? Pretty much in every major religion, go to the next one if you will. God abides hidden in the heart of all, Hinduism. Do not search in distant skies for God. In man's own heart is God found. Shintoism. The next slide. Why wilt thou go into the jungles? What do you hope to find there? Even as the scent dwells in the flower, so God within thine own heart ever abides there. Seek God with earnestness and find God there. Sikhism. The next one. What the undeveloped man seeks is inside. What the advanced man seeks is within himself. And then finally from Luke. The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, neither shall they say, lo here or lo there, for the kingdom of God is within you. It is within you. It is a dimension of you, would probably be perhaps a more accurate way to say that as where is God? And so we have to talk about this idea called original sin. How many of you have given birth to a newborn baby? How many of you have been present at the birth of a newborn baby? How many of you have ever seen a newborn baby? all of us. How many of you looked at that newborn baby and said, you are so precious, you poor little sinner? I'm so sorry you were born into original sin. Did that even cross your mind? I believe it's time we start talking out loud about these things. That there is a doctrine, there's a teaching of original sin, but if you really break it down, I believe there should be a doctrine of original virtue. And so that's what we point to, is that the scriptures say we're made in the likeness and image of God. And God said that it is good. Good meaning life affirming. Good meaning that it is like God, that it is like the creative presence. And so the challenge when we really don't think through, you see, really what we mean, I think what was meant originally by sin is an archer's term, which means to miss the mark. And it's about growing into the awareness of who you are. The truth of the matter is we all grow up and don't yet fully know who we are. And so we flounder until we realize what is within us. And in our floundering within us, it can look like that we're sinners, that we are totally missing the mark. But something really harmful happens when we teach people that you are born spiritually defective. Because to believe that you are born spiritually defective is it drives us in ways that I think we're just beginning to be aware of. That's what Jesus' message was all about, that you could have a relationship with the Father, as he called Abba, the Creator, that all people could go direct because we are one. He said, I am one with the Father. It was his last prayer, that we may know the same truth, and he also had taught throughout his life that we could do the greater things. And so to me, even though we may say, I don't believe that, I believe in original virtue, there's still an energy that is being healed in our world. Would you agree? There's an energy of shame. There's an energy that says you are that we're all somehow flawed. I believe that we're born and we all realize that there's more to us than meets the eye. We feel like something's missing because we realize that in our infinite state, we're part of all that is. And we come into this human life and we realize something's missing, and we translate that to mean something's missing in me, that something's wrong, and we have to feel like that we have to hide something. Our goal is to realize that we are all born inherently worthy, that we are the likeness and image of God. And so if there's only the one power and the one presence, and we are that, then our goal and question becomes, how do we hold it? How many of you have a child or a friend or someone in your family, or maybe even in your own life, and you've realized that you haven't been able to hold your self-worth? How many of you have seen an individual that was just going down a path of destruction? They could not hold their own value. They couldn't see it from themselves. And the choices that they made were clearly flowing from the belief that they were just doomed or damned, that something was wrong with them. And even if you could believe it, if you could hold it for them and knew that that was not true, until they could hold that truth for themselves, their life was not going to change. So it becomes about our capacity to hold or to embody, to become the embodiment of the fullness of all we are. That's what the Christ energy does. The Christ energy is always growing us into the becoming of our potential, always into the perfect pattern of our own becoming. I saw on television a story of a man that had outsmarted police officers for 21 years. This man was a well-known thief, would burglarize houses and businesses. And his trademark, he would only go in when no one was there. He never hurt anybody. He never destroyed anything, but he was a major thief. And he did this for 21 years. And when they finally caught him, people were surprised because it was this well-dressed, kind of upstanding guy. And they asked him, why did you do this? And his simple reply was, I don't know how to do anything else. You see, I think what he was really saying is, I don't know myself other than anyone than a thief. And so he showed up as a thief continually. Myrtle Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity with her husband Charles Fillmore, this was back in the 1800s, she had 3 children. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis. In that day and age, tuberculosis was a life sentence. She had come from a lineage of women who were sickly. When she developed tuberculosis, she thought it was a death sentence. And when she reached the end stage of her life, here she is with 3 young children, and she doesn't want to die, but she's terribly sick. Neighbors are helping take care of her. Her husband and she are struggling financially in every way possible. And there was a guy going through, his name was Dr. E.B. Weeks, holding these old-fashioned tent revivals. And she went to that hoping to hear something. And in the course of what he was saying, he said, you're a child of God. You do not inherit sickness. She said something within her jumped up and down and said, yes, 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 that is true. She didn't know how she knew it to be true. She just believed that it was true. And so she went home and she began to work with that idea. I am a child of God. I do not inherit sickness. That my ancestors don't define my destiny. My bank account doesn't define my destiny. Nothing about where I am in this moment defines my destiny. And so she was guided to begin to talk to her body. She began to talk to the cells of her body. She began to pray. You see, it led her back to what did she believe about God and what did she believe about herself. She had believed that it was God's will for her to die, and she had believed that she had inherited sickness and was going to die. When she began to realize that Maybe it wasn't God's will. She didn't know. But what if she could connect with God directly? And what if she was a child of all that is and could open herself up to that? Over a period of about 18 months, she steadfastly worked with that, and she completely, miraculously healed. She lived to be old in her 80s. And the people around her said, I don't know what you did, but I want some of that. And that was in the time that they began their prayer. Would you give me that song, Richard? And what they were realizing is that whenever they thought their self a part of God or thought God a part of them, that is when they began to have challenges. If they could remember that they were always a part of God and God was always a part of them, they realized everything's going to be okay. The last thing I want to share with you is a story. Would you show me the last slide? You may have seen this particular statue. There's something in common in both of these, and you'll realize what it is if you haven't already identified it. This comes from Buddha Touches the Ground. Mara laughed at the sage. In Buddhism, Mara, M-A-R-A, is what we have in Christianity called the devil. Mara, or the devil, is referred to as the adversary. It's basically that internal process of adversarial thoughts. So Mara laughed at the sage, poured scorn on his efforts, tempted him with power, irritated and kicked him, seduced and distracted him, and offered him celebrity status. Siddhartha sat firm. After all, he had been through most of these scenarios during years as a wandering monk and an ascetic. But then Mara did the last thing possible. Mara dug into Siddhartha's self-belief. What makes you think you are worthy enough? You who have left your wife, abandoned your son, distressed your parents, rejected your ancestors, you who never gave alms, you who couldn't even last as a yogi, what on earth makes you so special? Siddhartha did not compete nor fight back. Instead, he simply touched the ground. So you notice the right hand is touching the ground. Touch the ground with his fingers as a gesture of connectedness and belonging. You see, symbolically, to touch the ground is to go back to the foundation. It says, I'm a part of all that is. I'm a part of this. And the ground of my being is that I may know that there's nothing to defend, that our worthiness is not self-generated. Our worthiness is source-originated. And there is nothing or no one that can ever take that away. But each of us are growing in the awareness. That recipe for happiness is to grow in the awareness of who we are in the one. And so this week, I invite you to begin to pay attention to the ways that, how do I think myself outside of God? And how do I think God outside of me? And without trying to figure it out, this week, simply bring awareness to it. And as you bring awareness to it, touch the ground. Touch the ground, your foundation, the ground of your being, and then smile. According to the Buddhist scriptures, it says, just as Buddha touched the ground, the earth moved and tilted. Mara fled with his troops, and Siddhartha became the enlightened Buddha. In that moment, a smile of illumination as he touched the ground. We touch the ground and we smile when we remember that we can never be outside of the one, and the one can never be outside of us. I want to anchor this in a time of meditation, and the song that I've chosen, would you go to the next slide? The song that I've chosen to do this says, I am as God created me. I am a light in this world. I am as God created me. It goes like this. I am as God created me.